Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, I want to talk about more of the issues of obesity, and I want to break down a lot of the barriers to obesity. This video can absolutely be helpful to somebody currently trying to lose weight. Maybe just hearing some of the barriers they might not have thought about could help them deal with it, but it is primarily for thinner people that have never been fat that are confused as to why fat people don't lose weight. Or the question I saw on a Reddit thread was, why do very fat people, specifically over 300 pounds, refuse to lose weight? Is it really that hard to move more and eat less? So this video is made to kind of provide clarity on these issues. I really care a lot about actual fat advocacy in terms of coming up with solutions for obesity and in terms of educating people about obesity and the actual issues that arise from it. So I want to just paint this as these are barriers that people tend to have, and the goal is to mitigate these barriers or deal with them so that enough of the barriers are gone to where weight loss is possible. Okay, so it's not a black and white thing. It's not that it has to be perfect. It's not that there can't be any barriers. It's that as many of these barriers that can be must be addressed. Because when enough barriers have been addressed, said person can lose the weight. Okay, so I split this up into two different categories. I have physical barriers and psychosocial barriers. And the psychosocial barriers are actually a lot longer and more complicated. The physical barriers are things that people talk a lot about online. So I'm going to kind of just quickly go through the physical barriers. But what I will say off the bat is the biggest physical barrier is hunger. So I will just say it is not helpful to not believe fat people when they say they're hungry. Oftentimes, we'll get into the other physical barriers in terms of obesity, but oftentimes, most of these other physical barriers cause hunger. So if you are hungry all the time, 24/7, you're going to end up eating more. And I don't care what a thin person says. If you were hungry all the time, you would eat more. You typically would. But a lot of fat people have physical issues that lead to increased hunger, and that makes them eat more. So I've seen questions like that from thin people where they say, how can you eat so much? I can't even bulk, or I can't even gain weight. It's because fat people have these other issues going on. So the second most important one is slow metabolism. Slow metabolism is usually not genetic. I don't really buy that. It has to do with hormone disorders like hypothyroidism, which is very common within fat people, especially morbidly obese people, or other hormone issues like PCOS, which are also more common in morbidly obese women. So when you look at these hormonal issues, they create entire systemic bodily problems that lead to increased hunger, from having your adrenal axis activated from extreme hypothyroidism. Like if you get to a severe level, your adrenal axis will be activated. That affects your blood sugar control, and that can lead to things like diabetes. It can also lead to hunger, intense hunger, and lack of energy, which that's another issue, is exhaustion. So I think a lot of thin people, they do acknowledge that fat people are exhausted, but they don't ever actually think about what that means. If you're exhausted, then every single task that you're doing takes a lot of effort. So a lot of things that thin people can take for granted are things like tying your shoes, getting up, sitting down, walking up and down stairs, going to the grocery store, something like that. It can cause a lot of fatigue in a very obese person or a very obese person is already fatigued. So these tasks take a lot of energy, and people often need to eat more to have energy. They need to eat more, especially carbs, to have a quick source of energy to be able to complete these tasks. And it can be very difficult to stay within a calorie deficit or to eat less if you are absolutely exhausted. Another issue that goes hand in hand with this one is insomnia. So somebody who is suffering from long-standing insomnia, they are going to really struggle with losing weight. It's very difficult on the body. And if you are not sleeping enough, it makes it harder for your brain to choose the right foods either on your program or within a deficit. You're going to tend to feel a bit looser if you're exhausted. So, from being tired from not sleeping. So that's another thing. Insomnia can also happen within hypothyroidism as well, if it's severe and that adrenal axis is activated, and it can be hard to sleep at night. I've known that one all too well. Anyways, the next ones are also somewhat obvious, but financial issues. So if somebody has financial stress where they can't even pay their bills, or they're worried about if their place is going to be pulled out from under them or they're going to get evicted, that is going to be extremely stressful, and that can lead to stress eating, paradoxically. So if somebody is not financially secure, it can be a huge stress on that person. That's why you do see a lot of very poor people being very overweight, because it's extremely stressful. I know a lot of thin people have had financial issues, but if you haven't, just imagine if you don't always know where your next meal is coming from, if you're constantly drowning in financial problems, debt, lack of funds, you can't get enough food, or you feel like you can't, you're not able to pay your bills on time, you have your utilities turning off and on every month. Like, that stuff is very, very stressful, okay? And that can also lead to you having to make different choices in regards to food. So a lot of times you can get high calorie foods for the same price as very low calorie foods. So it actually, the perception is that it makes more sense to think I can get more full if I have, tater tots at Walmart or something, which are fried, versus buying apples for the same price. It's so many less calories, and that can feel like a luxury to somebody that doesn't have enough money, because they think, I want to at least feel full if I don't have enough money to do anything else, to feel anything else. And that's why when we're in a situation like what we're currently in economically, it can lead to a lot of weight gain, and it can lead to a lot of struggle with losing weight. When things like inflation are happening, when the economy is the way it is, it really is difficult for poor people to lose weight in a situation like this. It is, absolutely. That's a physical barrier to weight loss. So the other things are cutting out entire food groups. So this is a very common practice with fat people. You'll see a lot of fat people talk about how they hardly ever eat carbs, or they don't ever eat meat. I think a lot of fat people give up meat. It's like a very common thing. I think a lot of times too, if they're really poor, then meat can be expensive, so they'll not eat meat. That can lead to hunger, and you can actually end up eating more if you cut out an entire food group. But I see a lot of people that try to do diets. They cut out all carbs, cut out all meat, cut out all dairy. They cut out all this, cut out all that. It can lead to problems. So cutting out an entire food group can be a huge issue in regards to weight loss, and a huge barrier, because you will be hungrier. And that is, again, it goes back to hunger. Most of those physical barriers involve hunger, which, yeah. So we're done with that. And just remember, all these things can be worked on. So think of it that way. Don't think of it as like, oh gosh, this can never change. No, I'm specifically talking about individual based things and not talking about systemic things that can be harder to control. We're talking about individual barriers, okay? So now let's get into the psychosocial barriers. Psychosocial barriers involve psychological and basically social. I mean, that sounds kind of stupid to say it that way, but it has to do with internal states of mind and how other people are treating you or how other people see you. So there's a lot of these issues in regards to weight loss. So even somebody who has the means or who has a decent metabolism, like a very young person, the focus would be more on these psychosocial issues, especially if their financial needs are being met. These issues are probably why they're not losing. You can see how complicated it can be if you have both physical issues and psychosocial issues. That makes it almost impossible to do, which is why a lot of people don't. So let's get into it. These are all things I've kind of overcome this year. The physical barriers I dealt with last year, especially when the inflation crisis was at its worst. It was extremely difficult for me. This year, though, it's been most of the psychosocial stuff, which is why it's fresh on my mind and why I can report it to you. So this one, psychosocial, the fear of becoming less attractive to men. So this is something that women and gay men will experience, and it's because men are visual. So how your body is really important to attracting guys, to attracting mates, to attracting whatever it is you're looking for in regards to the dating world. And this isn't talked about much because I think most thin people assume it's linear. They assume that the thinner you are, the more attractive you are, but that isn't true. There's a large set of men that do appreciate somebody that has a very big body. You know, there's people that talk about BBW and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of communities that are involved with liking people who are very, very big. And there are people that do just like somebody who's very, very big or who like big people. And typically if they're into big people, they want you to be very big because it's like more attractive to them. So what tends to happen is if you're super fat, so if you're like over 300 pounds or 350 or something, depending on your height, when you start to lose weight, you can lose the attraction of those men, but you're also not thin enough to attract more mainstream men. So you're just left in the dust. This happened to me in the summer of this year, and it was really jarring. And I'm not trying to act like I'm the hottest thing that has ever existed, but it's very rare that I have had zero attention from men. Zero. Except other times in my life when I was around that same weight that I was this summer. So it's very much a thing. And it's a huge psychological barrier that I think a lot of people aren't even aware of because it's very subconscious. And it's very like feeling based. It's not something logical. This isn't something that women and gay men think about and think, I'm just not as attractive to men today. Like you don't think of it that way. You just notice the pulling away. And it can be really scary because you don't know. When you're losing weight, you don't know what it will be like on the other side. And if you go into this and this starts to happen, it can become a huge barrier to losing the weight. So that's the first one that I'm going to talk about. The second one is the fear of identity change and the inability to change. So a lot of these psychosocial things have to do with fears. And this is a huge thing. There are many, many people who identify with fatness, and especially within the fat acceptance movement, a lot of people really advocate for you to identify with your fatness. If you were to lose weight, then you're selling out who you are, and other toxic messages like that. If you identify with your fatness, it can be extremely difficult to envision that identity changing, and you can and likely will self-sabotage yourself to avoid going through an identity shift. So this is really big. You have to work on it. You have to reflect, deal with it, do some internal work during the process, or it will be very difficult. And I always advocate for body neutrality. I advocate for not checking your body, not really looking at it all the time as much as possible until you're at a more stable point where you can handle it, basically. Like, I'm okay now, so I don't care anymore. But this summer, I cared. This year, I cared. It was bothering me. For me specifically, because I was identifying with my illness, with severe hypothyroidism, and it was really hard to see myself as a healthier person. It was a very difficult concept for me, particularly in the months of July to now, to November. And I'm starting to get out of it, actually. But it was tough. It's very hard to have such a deep shift, because people get used to being sick. So that's a huge psychosocial barrier to weight loss. The fear of having energy. So there are a lot of very fat people that are used to being exhausted, and this kind of goes with the identity issue, but they worry about what they'll fill their time with. There's a lot of people that fear they'll start going to random parties all the time, or they fear they'll start hooking up with random strangers. That narrative is pushed a lot, where a lot of people that lose a lot of weight, they just kind of hoe out. And that narrative freaks out a lot of fat people. And I try to tell people, it's like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Like, just chill, what some TV show showed on TV, or what somebody did in college that you knew, it doesn't affect how you're going to behave. And so it's just like a weird thing where people don't know, like, what am I going to do with my time? And that leads to the next one, which is boredom. So when you get healthier, you can feel really bored, because your illnesses and your obesity, it takes up a lot of your time and energy. Also, eating can take up a lot of time and energy. Thinking about food can take up a lot of time and energy. If that's gone, then boredom can come in as a really huge psychosocial barrier to weight loss. You can be so bored that you feel bored to death. And that can be difficult. It's difficult. You can, because it causes a lot of fat people to kind of be on the razor's edge, dancing on the razor's edge with things out of boredom. So it's like they'll put themselves in tempting situations as far as dieting. They'll look at food that they want to eat, or they'll get they'll test themselves and do weird stuff just because they're so bored. Because it is tough. Weight loss is incredibly boring. It is probably one of the most satisfying things I've ever done, but one of the most boring things I've ever done. It's very boring. It's a huge barrier. The next one is the jealousy of other people. So there are a lot of people that do try to sabotage you when you're losing weight. Whether that's people online. Usually if it's online, it's because you're losing weight in a different type of way than what that person likes. So if that person likes veganism and you're losing weight, eating tons of meat every day, they can resent that you've lost weight doing a different diet, and they may attack you for it or get jealous or whatever. There's a lot of people too that are very obsessive with carbs. And if you were to be doing mukbangs or something online and you're talking about how you're losing weight, but you're eating like tons of rice every day and bread and stuff, and you're just eating a lot of carbs and you're making it work within your caloric deficit, that could make somebody irritated, and they might feel jealous that you're eating that many carbs, and they'll attack you for it. So it's like, that's more of like an online sense. But in your personal life, it can literally be like people are just genuinely jealous of the fact that you've lost weight, and they may try to sabotage you, or they'll pick fights with you, or they'll do stuff, because it is a change in status in our country. Because unfortunately, the sort of fat acceptance rhetoric, it has created fatness as a status in our country, in America specifically. So if you have a status change, That can be upsetting. It can be like going from poor to rich. That's not true. That's not what fatness is like at all, but that is the perception of another person. It's really not like that at all. But because of the cultural narrative pushed by fat acceptance people since the 60s, it creates that type of feeling that you're jumping into another class or something if you lose weight. And that can be a huge psychosocial barrier because maybe you're alienating your family now because all your family's fat and they feel like you're not one of us anymore, and it can turn into this weird thing. But that can be it as well as like having toxic friends that are very competitive with you and they want to undermine you, or siblings or whatever, right? So all that goes in that category. It's a huge barrier. This leads into needing to have boundaries with others. So like, let's say every time you see your parents, they want to go out to eat at a specific restaurant and there's nothing that you can eat at that restaurant. You'd have to say, I can't go there anymore. We have to do something different. That can lead to fighting. That can lead to this and that. A lot of very fat people are people pleasers. And this is a huge barrier to weight loss, is having to lay down the law or having to put down boundaries. I can't do this anymore. I can't go here. I can't do that. I can't eat this. You offend somebody, they're mad that you didn't eat it. That kind of stuff can cause barriers to weight loss. That can slow you down. So this one is more internal, but as you lose weight and you no longer have food as a coping mechanism, or your hormones start to improve and certain physical processes occur, deep feelings can come up to the surface. And this can be very disturbing to a lot of very fat people, and they try to eat again to put them back down because they don't want to feel it. And there is a lot of intrapersonal work that goes into a weight loss journey because obviously it takes a lot to be able to get, especially very big. You have to have a lot wrong. Honestly, I know that's harsh to say, but it's just a fact. There has to be a lot wrong for you to let it get so out of hand. So as you're fixing it, those things come up to the surface and they have to be dealt with. And that can be a huge barrier to weight loss. This goes along with other aspects here where we talk about where your life is falling apart. So if you have a situation where you're like married or something and your marriage is falling apart and it's like really horrifying to you, that can be a huge barrier to weight loss. If you have a death in the family, that can be a huge barrier to weight loss. If the whole panorama is a very big societal example of this category, which I called it life falling apart, broken dreams, and demoralization. When these things happen, it can demoralize somebody, like if they lose their job or if they lose their entire way of life, like we did during the panorama. That can be something that will cause somebody to gain weight or can definitely prevent weight loss. So that's a huge barrier, is if your life is falling apart for whatever reason. But that is a good example of a societal level of that is causing issues. I think that's why a lot of people put on weight during that time. The fear of loose skin. So you wouldn't think this would be a big deal, but the fear of loose skin and things like perfectionist tendencies, those two kind of go together. So it's like you're never feeling good enough, or you look in the mirror and you can't stand the way you look, and it's like no matter how much weight you lose, you still don't like how you look. That's a very internal psychological thing that must be dealt with. It has to do with perfectionism and the fear of loose skin preventing weight loss. It's a huge factor, but it's just something that you have to deal with the fear, and you never know how it will be until it's been done, and it's like you just don't know. So I think that's a huge barrier for people. For the perfectionism, it can also have to do with your diet. You can be extremely strict on your diet, and it can cause you to want to rebel and like flip out and go the exact opposite direction, right? So you have to keep things in balance, and perfectionism is a huge psychosocial barrier to weight loss. Perfect can definitely be the enemy of the good. It's a very important thing to consider. Okay. Let me just check my list. Okay. So then we'll go into a couple more social things, and then we'll go into a really obvious one to end it on. So other people treating you differently as you lose weight. So this can be really jarring. So as I talked to you guys earlier in this segment, when I was talking about how men weren't finding me attractive at all, it wasn't just prospective partners or in a romantic sense. It was also in society. I was incredibly ignored at that size, and it was really jarring because when I was bigger, I felt like I had a spotlight on me. And when I lost some weight, I just faded into the background and I became invisible. And it's very jarring. And it's not so much how it changes, it's that it does change. So, like, let's say you're a woman and you're never hit on and you lose weight, and all of a sudden, a lot of guys are hitting on you. That can be very jarring. That can be a huge psychosocial barrier. It can be something that really freaks somebody out, or slows them down, or you can make them not want to lose weight anymore. Like, I've seen it happen that way, where I've seen people talk about how it was so disturbing to them that they gained all the weight back because they couldn't handle other people changing how they saw them or other people treating them differently. It really freaked them out. So you have to kind of be okay with things changing. A weight loss is a huge change all across the board, and it can be difficult. But people who resist any form of change, it can be difficult. And with that, we'll say the inability to forgive yourself and forgive others. So with weight loss, there has to be forgiveness. Oftentimes you have to let go of grudges. You have to forgive yourself for what you did to yourself. And you have to let things roll off of you, because that psychological weight, it can help keep physical weight on you, because it can keep your body in such a stress state that you can't lose the weight, or you end up eating more as a way to bury these types of feelings. That I've noticed with a lot of fat people, forgiveness is usually involved. There's usually trauma. There's usually some other stuff going on. You have to forgive. You have to learn to forgive things. And forgiveness in the sense of letting it go and just being like, it happened, it was wrong, but I forgive the person and I'm letting it go. Whether you talk to them again or not, it doesn't matter. It has more to do with you. As they say, bitterness and hate and stuff, it's taking poison for yourself in the hopes that it will hurt someone else. It's not helpful for weight loss whatsoever. The last thing that we can talk about in this category is obviously BED. BED is a huge psychosocial barrier to weight loss because it's an ED involving eating large amounts of food. That has nothing to do with how you feel physically. You can be full and you'll still eat. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's a completely psychological issue that can be very difficult. And that will obviously sabotage weight loss efforts and be a huge barrier. I definitely suffered with that when I was younger. So that's all for those psychosocial barriers. And lastly, I just want to kind of talk about some umbrella solutions that a person can do on an individual level that will help with a lot of these barriers. Okay, so these are just a place to start. And it's really just things that you can change and should change. And if you can change these things, it will help you and make you more likely to be a thin person. Okay? And these things are all within your control as a person. And if you are a thin person trying to help a fat person, these are things you can suggest to them. They will help. So the first one is, it can sound a little harsh, but making more money. So a lot of times the financial barriers can just be too big and you have to find a way to make more money in order to lose weight. So this is something we can control. We can always try to find other ways of hustling, other ways of making money. We can always work with things like that, right? But I think that's a big aspect to this issue. And the more money you have, the more helpful it is to lose weight, essentially. Because you have more access to different treatment options. You have more access to things like trainers or dietitians or, whatever. You have time to do things. Like sometimes having more money can give you more time. Like it's complicated, but essentially making more money will help you. It will. The second thing is very physical. So working on or treating your hormone issues, particularly hypothyroidism. So this would involve eating less estrogenic foods, so not having things like soy or other foods that are highly estrogenic. This is avoiding seed oils, not having them. They're horrible for thyroid health. They really cause a lot of hyposymptoms and weight gain. You could also avoid alcohol and weed. They're very much estrogenic, and anything that raises your estrogen, it will make you more hypo because estrogen opposes thyroid hormone. So there's a lot of lifestyle factors that people need to do, but a lot of times as well, you may need to go to the doctor and you may need to get prescribed a medication for hypothyroidism or take certain herbs or do something. You have to do something about it. Just letting it be is not helpful. You need to treat your hypothyroidism or you need to treat PCOS in the best way you can. You have to treat these hormonal issues. It will be very difficult to lose weight if you don't do anything about this. Okay, it's pretty obvious. The next thing is getting out more and living your life, no longer waiting till you are thin. So a lot of times people think, I have to lose the weight so I can live my life, but it's often the reverse. Often you have to live your life so that you can lose the weight. And this is because if you have more going on in your life, then you don't only have food as your only sense of joy. And again, boredom is a massive barrier to weight loss. So if you're doing stuff and you're going out, and a lot of fat people never go out, they don't do anything, they fear judgment of others, they fear a lot of these different things, but you kind of have to just have a tougher skin and just do it anyways, because what are you waiting for? So that is something that's really important, and it will help with a lot of the identity issues. You can't find who you are in your bedroom. You can't. You got to go out in the world. It will help you have more hope and stuff and help you bounce back from certain crises in your life, just because if you're going out and you're doing things, we often have bad things and good things happening at the same time in life. But if you're only ever sitting at home, then all you have to think about is the bad things, right? So go out and live your life. It will help with a lot of these issues. The next thing is finding a support system, people who support you losing weight online or otherwise. So if you can find people in person, that's great. If you can join a weight loss support group, that's great. Or if you find people online, you watch like anti-FA YouTubers or fitness people online, like that kind of stuff does help a lot in terms of just like getting you more in that mindset. Some of the best support I've had for weight loss has come from my friend Eric. Also my friend Lisa. We're both each other's weight loss partners, I guess. Like kind of like, it's like you keep each other accountable kind of thing. And we've done really well. And that kind of stuff is really helpful to have somebody to talk to about it and to have help, and especially help from somebody who has lost weight. It's really nice. It's very, very helpful when you're trying to lose weight. Lastly, get some hobbies, both introverted and extroverted hobbies. So you want to have hobbies that you can do when no one else is around, just so that you can depend on yourself to do it. You know, like you don't need anybody else. So like one of my hobbies, oh, I don't have it up here, but I knit. So knitting for me is a very introverted activity, and it doesn't depend on anyone else. But it's a huge hobby that has helped me. It helped me fill my time. It helped me when I'm craving a sort of physical sensation, and it actually stopped me from, it was like the final thing I needed to not binge anymore, because I just needed something physical to do. So that was really helpful for me. But you can come up with something else for yourself. And then you need extroverted hobbies too. So that'd be like joining sports groups, or a book club, or something like that, where you can go out and go be with people, or just be talking about things, talking like something that's more social. So even something like YouTube would be in that category, which I love YouTube. But something like that, it can be helpful just to have it as a hobby and just like talk about things and put your thoughts out there. Like you need both sides of the equation, and that can be really, really helpful. So I hope that all those things helped. If you have any other questions, leave them down below. I may make a follow-up video to this. I really want to increase understanding on these issues. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys again very soon. Have a good rest of your day, night, whatever. Bye-bye.